Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at PumaCom with Heat Seeker Sports. You're watching the Cheap Stack Show, and today I've got some cheap stacks that we can look at and also some statistical milestones for individual players that we can look at too. And those typically tend to be overlooked a little bit more than they should be in week 18, while they're a huge thing to look at in week 18. And I'll go over some of those right after this.
There is a ton of value in current underdog playoff best ball ADP. Elite offenses like the Rams are easy to stack. Take advantage of uncertainty and start drafting now. Use the promo code SEEK for up to $100 match on your first deposit. And subscribe to Heat Seeker Sports on YouTube for underdog strategy and drafting shows.
What's up, guys? Before we get into the analysis, make sure to hit the like button. Looking for about 15 likes to get a shorter video before the slate starts. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I just hit 360, so I'm about 40 away from that 400 goal, hoping to get there before the end of the regular season. And then during the playoff season, we can shoot for 500. So help me get to 400 for the end of the regular season. We're only 40 away, so we're very close to that mark. If you've watched the show throughout the season and you've had some success with some of the calls that we've made and stuff like that, just hit that subscribe button. Do me a favor and hit that like button, because that helps out with the engagement, helps out with getting these videos viewed by more people. We've been hitting about 500-600 views on a lot of these videos recently, and that's huge considering where I started at the beginning of the season. So appreciate all the growth and all the help from you guys and helping get the word out there with your engagement. And make sure to sign up for an underdog account. Use the promo code SEEK, SEEK, and they are going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit for a new account. And you want to do that because they have playoff best ball. If you've been watching my shows for playoff best ball, then you've been on the Houston Texans, you've been on the Los Angeles Rams, and you've been on a few of these other teams that have secured their spots in the playoff, and you've been getting them for good value, and they have good matchups in round one. So good potential for these value teams to go far in the playoffs. Helps us draft those first round bye teams that get drafted earlier on in the drafts. So makes it really easy to try to get those teams through when you're able to find that value later in the rounds. And we've been doing that on the playoff best ball show. So sign up for the underdog account. Use the promo code SEEK. Hit me up on Twitter. Send me a DM at PumaCom, and I will hook you up with my best ball playoff ranking or playoff best ball rankings. So that's something good to have. And let's dive into this slate. It is taking a look at the overall slate. There are some teams on here that have some really good matchups that I think are going to be a little overlooked. As I mentioned at the top, there's a lot of player incentives this week, and player incentives tend to go overlooked by the field for the most part. There's a lot of players that have some glaring milestones that they can easily hit, or not easily, but like they're within range and they have nothing else to play for with their teams. The teams have nothing else to play for. So they'll make efforts to get these guys to milestones. And I don't understand why these go overlooked. Week 18 is usually a pretty good week for me. I've focused on these milestones and these types of things for years. The other day, for instance, I called CeeDee Lamb would get 180 yards in the game that they played on the showdown slate. And he ended up with 220 yards. And people were like, oh, 180 yards, no way. And then he hit it. The milestone that he had to hit was a franchise record for receiving yards in a season. And he was 180 shy of Michael Irvin. And there was no way that he would want to break that record in week 18. He wanted to get there in week 17. So he had the same amount of games that Michael Irvin had. And I called that, made him my captain, and he ended up going off that game. But it just goes to show that these milestones are important for these players, especially when there's bonuses attached to it. So they are not something that you want to overlook. There are a few sites out there that have done a good job with kind of breaking these down. I just kind of read whatever I can on the subject. Establish the Run in particular is a good one. They usually do a good job kind of summarizing the milestones and everything like that. There was a few other ones that I looked at as well, and I just kind of cherry picked the most important ones, or the most in reach ones, I should say, the ones that I think are most likely to be hit this week, and I will kind of call those out as we're looking at these matchups. But there are a slew of these things that are well within reach, and they will be attached to players that are probably going overlooked. And a lot of players resting this week, a lot of players with nothing to play for this week and stuff like that, that might be a little bit more owned than they should be. And we'll have a way to kind of look at all these matchups and all these situations and scenarios of players that don't have anything to play for, players that are trying to go for playoff spots, players that are trying to play for these milestones and stuff like that, so we can filter out the crap. So let's look at Tampa Bay versus Carolina. This is the first game. Playoff implications in this game: Tampa Bay needs to win the division. If they win this game, they clinch their division. Baker Mayfield has all sorts of milestones attached to this game, where if he hits a bunch of top tens in statistical categories for quarterback, which he's right there in, then he can make $1.5 million. So he has a lot on the line to have a big game and incentivize him. And he's playing against Carolina. They got a tough pass defense, but they got this division on the line in this one. If they lose, then the winner of the Atlanta New Orleans game would clinch the division. So a lot at stake for Tampa Bay. They have their destiny in their hands. They just got to win this game against Carolina. The total of this game is 37.5. We got a spread of 4.5 in favor of Tampa Bay. They're playing this game in Carolina, division opponent. It's a dangerous game. You can't assume anything. You can't be overconfident in anything. But, I think with enough incentives for Baker Mayfield, they can pull it off. I would not be targeting Baker Mayfield as a quarterback this week, but it's an interesting thing to note that they are in position to, win this division. Mike Evans has a few milestones that he needs to hit. If he hits 2 touchdowns, then he breaks the Bucs single season record for touchdowns. So we want Mike Evans to hit 2 touchdowns, but he's got a difficult matchup because Carolina is only allowing 9.3 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. But given the circumstances for Mike Evans, I like Mike Evans as a potential guy to target this week. And as we can look at his history, he's been a little bit sluggish lately. He had 27.6 DraftKings points against Jacksonville, but he and Baker have had a great chemistry. Last game that they played against Carolina, he had 32.2 DraftKings points. So Mike Evans is firmly in play this week. Baker Mayfield in that last game against Carolina had 10.88 DraftKings points. So just to illustrate, if you want to start, Mike Evans, you don't necessarily need to tag Baker Mayfield along with it. So Mike Evans is a guy to keep in the player pool. As far as the rest of the matchups in this game, the Tampa Bay running backs are in a good spot. So we're looking at Rachaad White. You look for Rachaad White to get some heavy usage in a game that these guys need to win. And last game that he played against Carolina, he had 19.6 DraftKings points. But other than that, he's hit 19 DraftKings points a whole bunch of times this season. Last week, he didn't do much against New Orleans, but I like Rachaad White this week. So Rachaad White and Mike Evans in an important game. I think that we can add those guys to our player pool this week. Cincinnati versus Cleveland is an interesting game. This is a game where neither team has incentives as far as playoffs or anything seeding is concerned. But on the Cincinnati side, Joe Mixon has a 2 touchdown incentive to make 100K, and he also needs 147 yards to become the second all-time Bengal. So those are pretty good milestones for Joe Mixon to strive for. And in a meaningless game against Cleveland, I would not be surprised if they just ride Joe Mixon throughout this entire game. And Joe Mixon's ownership in this game is going to be, let's see here, sort out what his ownership is this week. Looking at 3.41% owned. So Joe Mixon with all those incentives in the world to have a huge game, and he's only 3.4% owned. So keep that in mind with Joe Mixon this week. Other than that, I don't really see any need to go anywhere in this game, given that Cleveland has nothing to play for. They have pretty much secured their seeding in the playoffs, and they really have nothing to risk their players over. All right, so we can move on to the next game. Let me just check those other matchups. Don't see, like, Cleveland has all sorts of good matchups, but like I said, they don't have anything to really play for in this game. So I wouldn't see them really being worth trying to dissect for the matchups and stuff. But maybe Tillman, if they wanted to try to get Cedric Tillman going ahead of the playoffs, that might be one guy to try to target at 3,900. But other than Cedric Tillman, I don't really think that this is a game worth paying much attention to outside of Mixon and maybe some Tillman. Minnesota at Detroit. This is a game that has a total of 45.5. It's one of the higher total games on the slate. 3-point favorites are Detroit, and Detroit is playing for that number 2 seed. They need to win, and they need Dallas and Philly to both lose. So it's a long shot for them to get there. It could be a game where they pull their starters mid-game, but they, don't really have too good of a matchup anywhere in this game versus Minnesota. The running backs are getting 22.8 points a game versus Minnesota's defense. The wideouts are getting 17.9 Draftkings points a game against Minnesota's defense. I could see them maybe chucking it to what's his face, to Jameson Williams in this game, just to try to get him, like a few more of those live reps. Oh, but he's out, so never mind that. So he's not even playing. So yeah, I mean, this is probably another game that we can avoid. Minnesota is out, I believe, so they don't really have a way to get in at this point. I think they're just playing for pride in this matchup, and it'd be a great shootout matchup if we knew how long the starters were going to play for Detroit. And I don't really see any incentives for the Minnesota guys, but whoever the quarterback is going to be, I don't know if they've named it officially yet. I know that they were talking about naming it. Dobbs is going to be the number 2 quarterback behind Nick Mullins. So they got sticking with Mullins. Dobbs is going to be the number 2. That makes Mullins interesting, actually, because if Mullins is starting this game, they got nothing to play for. They're probably playing to pad their stats. So Mullins to Jefferson in that situation is interesting because Jefferson's matchup against Detroit, wideouts are getting 15.5 DraftKings points, and slot receivers are getting 24.8 DraftKings points a game. Jefferson runs 30% of his routes from the slot, He also runs, obviously a decent amount out wide, but that 30% from the slot is interesting to me, especially with that teaming with Mullins. I don't hate Mullins to Jefferson stacks actually this week because they're going to just, they're playing for tape. Like Mullins wants to get some tape out there. He's been having some great weeks as far as yards thrown. He threw 411 yards against Detroit the last game they played. He threw 303 yards for Cincy for 22 and 23 DraftKings points. I wouldn't be surprised to see Nick Mullins, put up around 300 yards in this game at 5,100. Like that, I could see that happening, especially if Detroit is going to play backups at some point in this game. If they see, maybe they're, the other teams are closer to clinching that number 2 overall seed, maybe they just start pulling the starters, especially on defense. And then Nick Mullins has a shot to kind of go wild in this game. So 5,100, and we're looking at Jefferson's $8,500 salary. So he's expensive, and he has not done a whole lot since he got back. He did have that 29-point game against Detroit the last time they played. So Mullins to Jefferson is an interesting stack this week. Mullins is cheap. Jefferson is expensive. Other than that, I wouldn't really focus too much on Detroit. Their whole angle is grit, and that leads me to think that like maybe they don't bench their starters in this game, and the matchup doesn't really favor anyone. So I think given the risk that they might bench their starters, maybe David Montgomery would be a good guy to run it back with. David Montgomery or Jahmyr Gibbs. I think those are the only guys that I would be interested in on the Detroit side. Gibbs last week only had 5 DraftKings points against Dallas. He did not really do much of anything. Meanwhile, Montgomery last week had 12.5 against Dallas. But yeah, Montgomery is probably where I would lean to most in this game, because they're probably going to try to grind the clock out as much as they can. And, that fits kind of a David Montgomery game script. So Mullins to Jefferson, maybe run it back with Montgomery. But I'm not really holding my breath for Detroit starters to play the entire game. Jets versus New England is a division rivalry. It's a low-scoring total. We got the worst total on the slate with a 30.5-point total with 1.5-point favorites towards New England. The only good matchup here, really, apart from Garrett Wilson, he's got a good matchup, but he doesn't have a good quarterback. And Zeke Elliott is in a really good matchup because the Jets are giving up 27.5 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. Zeke has some potential milestones for bonuses, but he's got to get like 200 yards or something like that, so I wouldn't count on those at all. But look at what Zeke has done, since he's kind of taken over that starter role when Stevenson got hurt. He had 13 DraftKings points, 27 DraftKings points, 21 DraftKings points, and 11.5. He's 5,900, so he's not too cheap, but Zeke is a guy you can keep in your player pool this week, given the matchup, and he's incentivized this week. Other than that, not really interested in this game. Atlanta, New Orleans is another game with playoff implications. If Tampa Bay loses, then the winner of this game would win the division. So believe it or not, Atlanta is somehow still alive. They're like cockroaches, like them and Pittsburgh. Like they're ugly to look at and they don't go away. So yeah, we could be stuck with Pittsburgh in the playoffs this year. They could knock Buffalo out of all teams, and we could end up with Atlanta in the playoffs too, as ugly as that is. So Atlanta versus New Orleans. We're looking at a 42.5 point total. 3-point favorites on the Saints side. No real great matchups here. This to me seems like a game that is going to be a slugfest. It's going to be low scoring. And there's no really good matchups to speak of. They are incentivized, both sides, to win this game, but Arthur Smith, even under incentive, is hard to trust with using those stud players that he has. The best matchup is Kyle Pitts, but they don't use him. So, New Orleans is giving up 15.5 DraftKings points a game to that tight end position. They're giving up 20 DraftKings points a game to the slot. I really don't even know what to do when Atlanta has good matchups, just because they're not going to use their good players. It's so stupid. It's like so counterintuitive. They just don't do it. And New Orleans on the other side, I do like the New Orleans passing game. They've been playing a lot better recently. And let's take a look at Derek Carr. He's at 5,600, 15 DraftKings points last week. He had 2 weeks in a row. He had 29 against the Rams, which is a big deal. 20 versus the Giants. Other than that, he's had like a couple good games throughout the season, but playing against this Atlanta defense, he's got a middling matchup. Nothing to write home about. Nothing really too interesting, other than the fact that they're playing for the season and for a potential winning of the division. Olave, probably too expensive. He'd be the guy that I would want to stack with Carr, obviously. As far as the actual matchup, wideouts are getting 7.5 DraftKings points from Atlanta's defense. Slots are the better target, 18.7 DraftKings points. Rashid Shaheed runs 48% of his routes from the slot, and Olave is running 40% of his routes from the slot. So nothing really major there. If you wanted to target this game, though, I'd be looking at Shaheed and Olave, but I'm not interested in this game, even though it's one of the main games with playoff implications this week. I just don't trust the Arthur Smith side of things, and I don't want to mess with it. Jacksonville versus Tennessee is an interesting game because Jacksonville needs to win this game to hold on to the division. If they lose, then Houston wins the division after a big win tonight. So Jacksonville is heavily incentivized to win this game. They're playing against a division opponent on the road. Tennessee has plenty of room to play the spoiler in this game. They got Derrick Henry, who can grind out a game. They got DeAndre Hopkins, who has a ton of incentive to play well this week. If DeAndre Hopkins gets, what's he need? DeAndre Hopkins needs 7 receptions, 39 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns for $750K. So if he has a big game, he can basically make $750,000. So DeAndre Hopkins is heavily incentivized in this game to do well, and Tennessee has nothing better to do but throw the ball to him. Will Levis has been ruled out. So actually, he's questionable. I thought he was pretty much ruled out. Let's see. Limited participant in practice on Thursday and Friday. Head coach Mike Vrabel announced Friday's practice that Tannehill will draw the start. So yeah, Tannehill is going to be the starter this week, which is the bad news for DeAndre. But maybe they can find a connection. He needs those catches and he needs those yards and those touchdowns. So maybe Tannehill is able to find it in him for the first time this season, which is unlikely. But he's at 4,800, and he is in a good matchup to do it in because Jacksonville is giving up 22.6 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They're giving up 18.4 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, and they're giving up 24.8 DraftKings points a game to the running back position, which sets up Derrick Henry as well. So the key players on Tennessee all have good matchups this week, and Jacksonville in a must-win game. Their defense is a huge liability in this matchup. On the other side, Tennessee is allowing 18.5 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, which sets up Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is set up for an interesting game. As far as Trevor Lawrence is pushing to play in Sunday's contest. Lawrence isn't at risk of further injuring his throwing shoulder, so availability boils down to pain tolerance. So I would imagine that Lawrence is going to play this week. And it's news that we want to keep an eye on, but Trevor Lawrence should play this week. And I believe that is going to set up Calvin Ridley for a good game. Calvin Ridley's at 6,500. He had a big game against Tampa Bay a couple weeks ago. What did he do the last game that he played against Jacksonville? Let's see. Guess he didn't play against Jacksonville in the first meeting. Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be an interesting situation with Calvin Ridley, because it looks like, I'm sorry, Tennessee. Duh. He had 34 DraftKings points against Tennessee the last game that they played. So Calvin Ridley is set up at 6,500 to have a big game in a important game with the division on the line against a division rival. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, that's a mini stack to have in your player pool. I think both those sides could go off, and it's all kind of going to be dependent on the arm of Ryan Tannehill, if he can pull it off. And I like Derrick Henry too in this game, given this matchup. So Henry, Hopkins, and Ridley are all interesting to me in this matchup. Don't know if I want to go there with the Tannehill component of that stack. I think I'd rather just do a game stack without the quarterbacks in that one. Seattle versus Arizona. We'll go to that one next. This is a game with the highest total on the slate. They're at 47.5. Seattle are only 3-point favorites. It's a important game for Seattle. They need to win this game, and I think they need a couple other things to happen for them to get into the playoffs. It might be a win and in for Seattle though. Let's see. No, because Green Bay's, I think Green Bay's a win and in. So they need Green Bay to lose, and Seattle needs to win. Both those teams are playing at 325. So Seattle is playing to win this week, and quarterbacks, Geno Smith is 6,100. Kyler Murray is 6,400. Both those quarterbacks are, let's check the ownership on them. Go to the Seattle game here. By the way, DeAndre Hopkins is not very high owned. He's about 14% from the projections that I see, which I would expect him to be more given all the incentives. And he seems the most likely to be able to achieve like all those bonuses and stuff. And they will be making an effort to get him there, I think. So I'm surprised to see him kind of only at 14%. But Kyler Murray has been coming on lately. As far as Seattle's defense, Seattle is allowing 18.4 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. That's a middling kind of setup. They're allowing 29.1 DraftKings points a game to running backs. That's a huge number. Good for James Conner. And they're allowing 14.7 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position, which is good for the tight end over there, Trey McBride. Trey McBride last week, 10.8 DraftKings point. Week before that, 9. Before that, he was on a tear for a big part of the season. Let's see what his ownership is. Trey McBride is 14.5%. I like him this week. I don't like that number and that ownership, but given his matchup and given the total on this game, I think Trey McBride is definitely a guy to keep in the player pool. He's at $6K, so he's expensive, but that's mainly based on like what he's done throughout the season. He's had some big weeks this season. He's been one of the top tight ends. As far as wideouts, let's see what the matchup is for the Seattle side there. Wideouts are getting 14.9 DraftKings points a game from Arizona. Slots are getting 14.2 DraftKings points. That's a bad number. The wideouts are a middling number. On the Arizona side, wide receivers are only getting 8.8 DraftKings points. That's a bad number. Slots are getting 19.9. That's a middling number. And then that tight end matchup that I talked about. So basically, James Conner and Trey McBride are the guys to focus on for the Arizona side. As far as Seattle side, you want to focus on Geno, probably to DK Metcalf. And then also Kenneth Walker is going to have a really good matchup. They're allowing 31 DraftKings points a game to the running back, so that's among the league worst, if not the league worst. Kenneth Walker in the last game that he played against Arizona had 16 DraftKings points. Nothing much to write home from, but as you remember, he was a little bit slow in the beginning of the season. DK Metcalf, what did he do last time against Arizona? Last game against Arizona, DK Metcalf had... Did he play them? He might have been out that game. 4, 5, 6. Yeah, he might have been, but might not have played that game. What about Lockett? Lockett in his last game against Arizona had 7.8 DraftKings points. Nothing there. Smith and Jigba last game against Arizona had 16.3. So Smith and Jigba was the big winner when DK Metcalf was out last time. Geno, what did he do last time against Arizona? Geno had 15.76 DraftKings points. So very middling there. Trey McBride is the most interesting guy to me. What did he do in week 7? Only 5.9 against Seattle. So not really too much there, but the total is high. The matchups are good. So if you think they can buck the results of the last game they played against each other, I think that Geno's at a pretty good price at 6,100. Kyler Murray, well, actually 6,100 is actually kind of expensive. Kyler Murray, I think, though, at 6,400 with that rushing upside is someone I'd be a little bit more interested in. 24 DraftKings points last week, 20.4 the week before that. He had a few 20-plus point DraftKings points per game weeks. When he first started, he only had really two down weeks with 11.8 versus Pittsburgh, a tough defense, and 15.34 against San Francisco, a tough defense. Seattle's not a defense to fear. They have been middling against the quarterbacks. I like Kyler Murray this week, so let's keep him in mind for when we get to the build. Chicago at Green Bay. This is another game with huge implications for Green Bay. But the thing I like about this game is the narratives, and Chicago is, I won't say riding high, but their coach just got secured for another year. They have the number 1 draft pick locked in. They're floating around with another top 10 draft pick based on where they finished this year. But they have the number 1 locked in. They are playing a division opponent who's playing for getting into the playoffs. If they win, they're in on Green Bay's side. And Green Bay has a history of mocking Chicago with Aaron Rodgers screaming to the crowd that he owns them. So there's nothing that Chicago would like more than to come into Green Bay's own house and knock them out of the playoffs. And Justin Fields has been playing really well lately. You can see it in his stats. 25 DraftKings points last week, 25 the week before that. He's had a few 25 point games throughout the season. He got injured for a little stretch there, but before that, he was riding high with 232 DraftKings points games in a row. I can see Justin Fields playing for his job, coming in here to Green Bay and having a big game. He's at 7,200. He's not as cheap as he was when we were starting him earlier in the season, particularly on the showdown slates. But I do like Justin Fields this week. I do like Jordan Love too. Jordan Love's cheap. He's only 6,600. For the upside of Jordan Love, that's pretty cheap. So I don't hate Jordan Love this week. The matchup for these teams, we're looking at a 45-point total, 3-point favorites, Green Bay. The matchup isn't great for Jordan Love. Their defense has improved. The Chicago defense has improved as the year's gone on, but they are still susceptible to the slot receivers and tight ends, which is interesting because Jaden Reed is the hottest receiver on Green Bay right now, and he's a slot receiver. He left the game last week with a chest injury, and he's listed as questionable. Let's see what it says about him. Packers listed Reed as limited participant Wednesday and Thursday with a playoff spot in the line. Yeah, he's going to be playing. Jaden Reed is in a really good matchup. He's only 5,700. Given his upside, that's pretty good. Look at his last few games: 26.9 against Minnesota, 17 versus Tampa Bay, 20.5 versus the Giants. He's had a slew of other good games in there, but he's become like one of the best targets in Green Bay, especially with Christian Watson out. Even with Christian Watson back in, I think Jaden Reed is the genie that you can't put back in the bottle. 8 targets last week, 8 targets the week before that, 10 the week before that, 8 a few weeks before that. So he's been getting consistent 8 to 10 targets. So I like Jaden Reed this week. Let's see what his ownership is. See if people are going to be focused on this game. Let's see. Ownership on Reed is 5.5% projected. Let me check another source because I find that hard to believe. Let's see what see what I can get for another projection here. Let's see. Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed, DK, large ownership, 6.4%. Reed is in play at 6.4%. Even if he was higher owned, who cares? Like, he's got a great matchup against Chicago, giving up that 21.2 DraftKings points a game to the slot. Chicago, on the other side, Green Bay is giving up 26 DraftKings points a game to the slot. That would favor Darnell Mooney, but I think Mooney might be on IR. Where is Mooney? Yeah, he's out. So, maybe they run more in the slot. Moore has he's been really good this year. He had 34 DraftKings points last week. He had a stretch there where he had 3 in a row of 20 plus DraftKings points, and then he had that monster 52 DraftKings point week. If Chicago is to beat Green Bay, Moore is going to be a big part of it. Like this is the game I think we target this week. There's just too much going on in this game to ignore it. And I don't see a lot of attention on it either. Justin Fields has 14% ownership. DJ Moore is at 22, so maybe there is attention on it. But if you go the Green Bay side of things, Jordan Love has shown himself to be pretty matchup proof. Let's go ahead and start stacking Jordan Love. We're going to put him with Jaden Reed. We'll run it back with DJ Moore. Don't have to think too hard about that one. Let's check out our defenses. We'll get to defenses later. Other guys that I'd like in this game, let's see what the matchups say. Green Bay's tight end. Musgrave just got activated from IR. He is questionable, but I think now that Kraft has been kind of tearing it up, like what's the point of using Musgrave when right away? So let's get Kraft in there as his second receiver. Christian Watson is also questionable. He's been having a hamstring issue all year. He wasn't at practice on Friday, but he had 2 other days, so maybe they're just giving him a rest. Christian Watson is at 4,700. All right, let's get Kraft out of there. Let's put Christian Watson in there as his second receiver. I'd rather take that discount at wide receiver. All right, so there's our stack. DJ Moore, it's aiming for a shootout with this game, basically. I think Chicago's going to be aggressive. I think Green Bay's going to have to be aggressive, and I think Jordan Love actually has some incentives going too if he has a big game. So I like this. I like this matchup overall. I like the Green Bay side of it. Everybody's going to be focused on the Chicago side, apparently. Let me check another source on that. Let's see. Let's check out and see what the Green Bay situation is. Looking at Jordan Love, yep, 4.2%. Jaden Reed's low owned. Aaron Jones is 18%. Just because he had one big week. I will gladly take the passing game over Aaron Jones in this one. Christian Watson, 0.5%. Keep an eye on Christian Watson's status because he might not be available, but I'm putting him in there. This Saturday night, 11:46 p.m. I got Christian Watson in my lineup right now. Going to be keeping a close eye on the news, though, tomorrow to see what his status is. I want to get DeAndre Hopkins in here, too. Let me just get him in here. I'll put him in the flex for now. I don't know what time this game is. I'll figure that out later. Let's look at defenses while I'm doing this. Commanders versus Dallas. Giants versus Philly. Let's see. Cardinals, Seattle, Panthers, Rams, San Francisco. San Francisco's going to be playing their backups in this game. Sam Darnold, if he's starting, we've seen Sam Darnold in the past. Rams defense could be interesting in this one. Although I think they're probably resting their starters too. Let's see. Vikings D versus Detroit. No. Denver versus Las Vegas. Maybe. Chargers versus the Chiefs. They might be playing their backups on the Chiefs side. And if they're playing backups, if their backups are any worse than their starters, then Chargers defense is looking pretty good at 2,800 playing at home. Titans versus Jacksonville. Cincinnati versus Cleveland. I mean, that might be interesting because Flacco's going to be resting this week. Green Bay for Chicago, Detroit, Minnesota. I don't like any of these matchups this week. I'm just going to put in the Chargers because I don't like anything else. So we got the Chargers. Eckler has those motivations. Let's get Eckler in there. He's only at 6,600. We get Eckler in there, and we got 5,200 left per spot. Tight end, we can always get cheap. McBride, let's put him in there. He's not that cheap. 4,500 for our second running back. Leaves us with options like, let's see if we can find a guy that might. Let me look at ownership and see what the highest owned running back is on the slate. That's usually a good cheap guy. I don't know what the injury situations are this week. Jordan Mason is the highest owned guy. So Jordan Mason is the guy that we want to get in. So let's get out that Chargers D. Leaves us with Vikings as an option. I don't like that because Detroit's playing for something. Rams as an option. I kind of like that. Panthers, Cardinals, Giants, and Commanders. I think the Rams are probably the best option there. And this, I mean, I like this. I know it doesn't have correlation, but it's got correlation as far as, we're playing guys with incentives. Eckler has an incentive. Hopkins has an incentive. McBride is in a good matchup. We covered that. As far as our game stack, we got Jordan Love to Jaden Reed and Christian Watson. We're running it back with DJ Moore. We got Hopkins with an incentive playing this week. So we got lots of guys with incentives in this lineup. What is Calvin Ridley's salary? He's at 6,500. If we wanted to swap out, DJ Moore or someone like that for Calvin Ridley, I mean, that point I want to have a Chicago guy in there, so I'm leaving DJ Moore in there. Trey McBride would probably be the guy to swap out. Well, that wouldn't really help us. If Christian Watson is out, then I would figure out a way to get Calvin Ridley in there over Christian Watson. That'd give you some correlation with DeAndre Hopkins. Way to get there is probably going to be taking out Trey McBride, finding another tight end in a decent matchup. So let's go through the rest of these games here. Looking at the Chicago Green Bay. Covered that. Let's go to Kansas City versus the Chargers. And as far as tight ends in that one, I'm guessing that Kelsey's going to be sitting. Doesn't have an injury designation. Chiefs have the option to rest some of their top players in preparation for the playoffs. They're going to be starting Blaine Gabbert. So, yeah, you can probably guess that, like, Travis Kelce's old. He's been beat up all year. I wouldn't be surprised if Noah Gray ends up being the main tight end this week. He's at 2,500. So keep that in mind if you need to swap out a Trey McBride and get some salary. Let's move on to the I'm not really interested in anyone else except for Eckler with those incentives that he has. Pacheco is questionable. I'm guessing that he's going to be out. He was a limited participant. Keep an eye on the news for these Chiefs. because I'm guessing that they're going to probably. I don't think that they can improve their status at all this week. They'd be playing to just kind of keep fresh, but why risk the injuries? You got McKinnon on IR already, and Pacheco's been banged up all year. Give the guy a break. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to start this week. Rashee Rice is already out. Keenan Allen is out. Jordan Palmer's in. He's at 4,900. I don't like him against this defense, though. I don't like anyone else in this game. Why am I even going there? Denver versus Las Vegas. This is a game with a low total, 37.5 points. Vegas are 2.5-point favorites. Denver has the good matchups in this game at running back and at slot receiver. But there aren't any guys playing for incentives, and their quarterback sucks. So there's nothing really there on the Denver side. Plus, Vegas isn't giving up very much to the passing game in general anyways, at least to quarterbacks. Vegas tight ends have a good matchup with Denver allowing 16.5 DraftKings points a game pretty much. I'm trying to find if there's another good tight end matchup. Green Bay with Kraft. If you swapped out Christian Watson, that's the move. If you swap out Christian Watson, if we find out that Watson is going to be limited, let's get out McBride there. Let's put in Kraft. Let's get Kraft in there. And then let's get in Ridley. Going to leave us with 3,200 for our defense. That sets us up with a lot better options. Gives us correlation with Hopkins. Hopkins and Ridley are the correlation in that game. Then we got the game stacked with Love to Reed and Kraft. All those guys have good matchups. And Jordan Mason, Austin Eckler has the salary incentives. Jordan Mason is just he's going to be the main running back on San Francisco this week. And then you got Moore as the run back. Then defense, you can just pretty much go with any of these guys, honestly. Like Jaguars is pretty good target against Tennessee with their playoff lives on the line. Ooh, Mullins versus Detroit's defense. Detroit's playing at home. They're going to light up Mullins. I'd probably go with Detroit in this situation. Let's look at some more teams here. Philly versus the Giants. Let's see. I don't know if I don't know how long they're going to keep their. If they see things going south in this game, Philly's just going to probably pull their players. They need some momentum, though. They need to have a big game out of their players this week heading into the playoffs. They got zero momentum right now. Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor is interesting at 5,300. So if you wanted to go away from this, I love this stack right here. But if you wanted to go away from it, Tyrod Taylor to Darius Slayton is interesting. They got great matchups. The Eagles are giving up 23.6 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. They're giving up 19.9 to wideouts. Those are among the league worst. Giving up 26.5 to slot receivers too. So Wan'Dale Robinson is set up. On the Philly side, New York is giving up 24.3 to running backs. That sets up DeAndre Swift. Wideouts are getting 18.5. A.J. Brown is within 50 yards, I believe, of a franchise record for yards in the season. Be breaking his own record. 21 DraftKings points a game to the slot. Devontae Smith is out this week, so that sets up A.J. Brown for an even bigger game. So A.J. Brown if I was stacking this game, I'd probably go Tyrod Taylor to Darius Slayton, run it back with A.J. Brown, maybe add Wandale in there. And maybe DeAndre Swift. So maybe it'd be like Tyrod Taylor to Darius Slayton, run it back with A.J. Brown and DeAndre Swift. I think that's probably the best way to approach that one. Swift is 6,800. I don't know why he's so expensive for a guy who really hasn't done anything recently. He had 15 points against New York the last time they played each other, but besides that, he hasn't done anything for weeks. And the offensive coordinator just sucks for Philly. I talked about it all season, about how I thought it was going to be detrimental for the team losing both offensive coordinators. That's not breaking any news, but I just thought that Philly was way overrated this season, given the changes of the coaching staff, and we've seen it firsthand. Like, look at where the coaches of the former coordinators are. They're both head coaches right now. That shows the quality of both those guys. Steichen almost got the Colts into the playoffs. They blew it on the final drive in the game against Houston. They were in the red zone pretty much, and Minshew threw a pass to to some scrub who dropped it. And their playoff was gone like that, but they were knocking on the door of like a playoff run in Steichen's first year as a head coach. He's the former offensive coordinator of the Eagles. And on the defensive coordinator side, we've seen the Cardinals pull off all sorts of upsets this year, including I think they had one last week too. But yeah, the Cardinals have been pulling off upsets all year. So they're really well. Yeah, they beat the Eagles last week. So they've been pulling off upsets all year, and just shows the quality of the coaches that they lost, that these guys are able to go not only as head coaches in other spots, but have pretty good seasons. So I know the Cardinals have a bad win-loss record, but they've had some impressive wins when they've won the games. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, like they hit a skid and they can't get out of it because the coaching sucks. And the players are trying to figure it out amongst themselves because the leadership isn't there on the coaching staff, and that was the whole concern throughout the season. And it's finally starting to show itself at the worst possible time in the season. They went on that nice run there where they won a bunch of big games against good teams, and it was kind of I was kind of backtracking on my stand. And then, of course, when they hit the Dallas game, they started losing, and they lost a couple games in a row. And like right back to what I was thinking at the beginning of the season. But I'm hoping, as an Eagles fan, that they go into the playoffs with some kind of a momentum. I hope they get it together because I want to see them make a run in the playoffs. And they have an easy first round matchup on paper against Tampa Bay. But if they can't get their shit together, then they're not going to beat Tampa Bay. But they should have a path to beat Tampa Bay. I think losing to Arizona was a big thing for the Eagles. It set them up in that matchup against Tampa Bay in that first round. But like I said, they need momentum to get there. And that's why I would hope that Swift and A.J. Brown can get it together this week, and you can run it back with that Tyrod Taylor to Darius Slayton. Slayton's got a bunch of incentives to play this week. His bonus incentives are, if he gets 5 receptions, 42 receiving yards, that's $200K for him. And for a guy that's probably not that, like on the high range of those wide receiver salaries, that's a significant bonus for him. So look for Slayton to get some work, and look for them to make an effort to get Slayton some work this week, because he's been the only consistent wide receiver that they've had, basically. last few weeks, 23.6 DraftKings points against the Rams, 18 against Philly, 10 against New Orleans. He's been okay. Like not throughout the entire season, but at least the last few weeks. Wan'Dale Robinson, the other guy I like. Last game versus Philly only had 4.6 points, but Philly's notoriously bad against slot receivers, and Wan'Dale gets plenty of targets, 9 targets, 7 targets. He only had 4 targets versus New Orleans, but then 7 targets, 5 targets, blah, blah, blah. So he gets a ton of targets. So Wan'Dale is set up in a game versus that horrible Philly slot defense. So let's move on to Rams versus San Francisco. Another game, like I said, where they're resting a bunch of guys. I don't think this game has any real implications. Jordan Mason is the only guy of interest with that cheap salary. Helps us put that lineup together that I like. So other than that, don't really steal any interest in that game. Move on to Dallas versus Washington. This is a letdown spot for Dallas against a division opponent playing in Washington. Dallas has been pretty bad on the road. Let's see, what has he done? Dak Prescott on the road. At Miami, he had 19 DraftKings points. At Buffalo, 7 DraftKings points. At Carolina, 16 DraftKings points. At Philly, he had a big game. At Philly, 31 DraftKings points. At the Chargers, he had 25. At San Francisco, he had 7. At Arizona, he had 15. At New York, week 1, he had 6. But they blew out the Giants that week. So, Dak Prescott, last game versus Washington, they played in Dallas. He had 35 DraftKings points, but now they're on the road. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. But on the Washington side, they should be able to shut down Washington's offense with that defense that they have. But you never know. Brissett, looks like Jacoby Brissett will be playing. Brissett is at 5K. Not really sure I want to go there. It's week 18. I don't really see a need to go there. What's McLaurin doing with Brissett? He had 29 DraftKings points a couple weeks ago, 16 last week in San Francisco. I don't think Brissett played that game, though. Howell had 28 attempts against San Francisco, so Howell played that game. CeeDee Lamb is going to be popular this week because he had a big game last week. But CeeDee Lamb already has the record. I don't like they're playing basically to win the division. They need to win this game, so they're going to be trying. But last game versus Washington, he had 17 DraftKings points. I'm not really interested in 9,300 CeeDee Lamb this week. I know the matchup on paper is great, but it's division opponent. They're playing on the road outside. Let's see. They're allowing 23.9 DraftKings points a game to the slot, 20.3 to wideouts, 32.3 to running backs, and 22 to quarterbacks. But this feels like kind of a weird game. Dallas is 13.5 point favorites. Maybe Tony Pollard is the guy that we want to look at this week at 6,500. Last game versus Washington, he had 22 DraftKings points. So he's had success against them. Given what Washington is giving up to running backs, maybe Tony Pollard is the guy to focus on here. And let's see what his projected ownership is. Let's see, Pollard. 20% ownership. So, I mean, he's not even like sneaky. So, Pollard is interesting at 6,500. You could, if you wanted to take out Eckler and, use Pollard's incentive to get into the number 1 or number 2 seed as a higher priority over Eckler, his salary bonuses, then yeah, that'd be a good pivot to Pollard with the better matchup too. But the rest of this lineup, I think is pretty solid. We got Kraft and Ridley in there now. You can swap that out to McBride and what's his face, McBride and Watson. It's a 2v2. Maybe you do one build with each, and then Eckler. Swapping him out for Pollard is an option because they're the same price point too. So, just keep that in mind. Those are a few different lineup angles that we can take this week. I like the Chicago versus Green Bay game. That's my favorite game on the slate. Just by going through it, I think that's the game with the most shootout potential this week, even more so than Seattle versus Arizona. Although I do like some pieces in that Seattle-Arizona game, especially the running backs and the Trey McBride play. So I'm going to keep them in my player pool. But, that's it for this week, guys. Make sure to hit the like button. Give me the 15 likes, and I'll try to put out a shorter video before the slate starts. And make sure to subscribe. I am only 40 subscribers away from hitting that 400 mark before the end of the season, before the end of the regular season. So if I can do that, that'd be great. I need 40 to get there tomorrow. And subscribe. Sign up for Underdog. Sign up for an Underdog account. Use the promo code SEEK, SEEK, like Heat Seeker, and they're going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit. And get in on those playoff best ball contests, because if you watch the content the past few days, just look at the thumbnails on the YouTube shows. You see, we were on the Rams way before the Rams clinched. It was on the Browns way before they started skyrocketing in ADP. Was on all sorts of these teams, these underlooked teams and stuff. And now they're getting more difficult to draft, but there are more values popping up. Right now we got Houston. We were talking about them with spread and Bob Gomes this past week. They were a team we were targeting. You get them for free. Now they're going to be expensive. But, once the dust settles, there's going to be plenty of value to find still. Green Bay right now is a good one. Green Bay is free right now. So they're one that we can target in playoff best ball. Make sure to hit me up if you sign up for Underdog using the promo code SEEK. Not only are they going to get a up to $100 match on your first deposit, but if you send me a DM on Twitter at PumaCom, I will send you my playoff best ball rankings. So get that done. Subscribe to the page, hit the like button, and I will see you guys tomorrow for a game script for Sunday Night Football. Bills versus Dolphins.